Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When James Miller found a forgotten 1886 barn in the Colorado foothills, he saw history begging to be saved. But as he restored the old bones, a power-hungry HOA president launched a relentless war, forcing him to fight for his land, his rights, and the soul of the past itself. I bought the land for the silence. Not the kind of silence you get with noise-canceling headphones or a double-insulated condo. I'm talking about the real kind, the kind that settles in your bones, that makes you forget what traffic even sounds like. 40 acres nestled in the foothills of Colorado, surrounded by ponderosa pines, golden grasses, and a wind that actually smells like something. I'd spent 2 decades working in city noise, restoring old buildings to their former glory, while dreaming of building something of my own. And then, like a quiet little miracle, I found the listing. Historic farmstead. Decrepit structure. Estate sale. No HOA. I was on that property less than an hour after I saw it. The listing didn't exaggerate. The farmhouse was leaning like a drunk cowboy, and the barn, well, if you squinted, it might have looked like a sketch of a barn drawn by someone who had only ever heard about barns in bedtime stories. But the bones were there, and on the cornerstone beam of that weather-beaten barn, carved in fading script, was the date, 1886. Most people would have called the barn junk. I saw a monument. I traced the timber joinery and old nails, studied the mortise and tenon framing. My grandfather used to talk about buildings like this. He was a carpenter back when craftsmanship wasn't just a buzzword you put on a business card. I knew what I had found. This wasn't just some structure on the verge of collapse. It was history, and I knew exactly what to do with it. The sale closed fast. Cash, clean title, no easements, no encumbrances. It was mine. I moved into a small camper while I got to work, starting with the frame, then roof bracing, then digging into the registry paperwork. 2 years of blood, splinters, and everything Home Depot didn't carry. I chased down original wood from a dismantled tobacco barn in Kentucky, used iron brackets hand-forged by a blacksmith outside Boulder, and hand-planed every damn beam myself. By the time I was done, the place looked like it had survived the Civil War, and maybe won it. I registered the barn with the National Register of Historic Places 6 months after finishing the restoration. That part was no picnic either. Application reviews, surveys, architectural records. But once it was done, I got the plaque. A heavy bronze plate that read, Certified Historic Structure, National Park Service, 1886. It felt like winning an Oscar if Oscars were awarded for doing all your own carpentry and swearing a lot at rotten floor joists. Neighbors trickled by during those first few months, curious types, retirees and SUVs. One rancher from the next ridge brought me a 6-pack, and we talked about weather and fencing and the god-awful cost of well maintenance. Most folks were friendly, and then came Karen. I should have known she was trouble the second she pulled into my gravel drive in a pearl-white BMW SUV, wearing heels. Heels. Out here, that's like wearing a ball gown to a pig roast. She stepped out like she was entering Versailles, sunglasses too large for her face, eyes already scanning the landscape like she was buying it with her gaze. "You must be Mr. Miller," she said, holding out a manicured hand. "Karen Dubois. I'm the president of the Aspen View Trails HOA just up the hill." I shook her hand, instantly regretting it. It was limp and cold, like over-chilled fish. "I wanted to introduce myself and talk to you about, well, the aesthetic of this place." I raised an eyebrow. "It's a barn." "Yes," she said, dragging the word out like it tasted wrong. "But you know, our community has very clear visual guidelines. Our development values harmony with the landscape. Neutral tones, clean silhouettes. No." She gestured vaguely at my freshly restored barn. "Abandoned structures." "It's not abandoned," I said. "It's a registered historic landmark. Federal status." She blinked. "Well, HOA guidelines take precedence for community cohesion, I'm sure you understand. We've sent a few notices already." She had. I'd ignored them. Or, rather, I'd read them, laughed, and then filed them in the part of my brain labeled delusional entitlement. Her letters read like they were written by someone who thought the world owed her a view and the legal authority to seize it. I explained, politely, that my land was not within HOA boundaries, that the barn had legal protection, and that the guidelines of Aspen View Trails meant about as much to me as a tofu burger at a Texas BBQ. She smiled, the kind of smile you give a child who just said something stupid. "Well, we'll be revisiting boundary maps soon," she said. "We'll keep in touch." I didn't like the way she said that. Over the next few weeks, I got more letters. Same letterhead, same signature, same threats wrapped in passive-aggressive grammar. One even accused me of visual contamination from County Road 12. That one I actually framed, just for the comedic value. I responded once, attaching a copy of the National Register certificate, a photo of the bronze plaque, and a letter from the Colorado Historical Society. I even printed it on nice paper, the kind lawyers use when they want to look civil before going for the throat. No reply. Instead, a truck showed up one morning with a guy who claimed he was here to inspect the derelict structure for HOA compliance. I asked him what part of not in your HOA he didn't understand. He looked confused and left, but the game had begun. And Karen, she wasn't playing fair. It was almost funny at first. Karen's letters, I mean. They read like HOA Mad Libs. Your property violates Section XYZ of the Aspen View Trails Neighborhood Code, followed by something completely untethered from reality. One accused my barn of posing a visual risk to driver safety. Another claimed the aesthetic deviation from approved colonial modern fusion styles was causing complaints from nearby homeowners. Right. Because someone drinking Pinot Grigio 3 lots up the hill might cry if they saw hand-hewn timber. I kept every letter in a file labeled delusions. I didn't respond anymore. What was the point? I'd made my position clear, backed it up with federal documentation, and besides, my property wasn't in their HOA. It was older than the HOA, older than the whole damn subdivision, older than the people who designed its pastel stucco hellscape. But silence doesn't mean surrender, and Karen didn't take well to being ignored. The escalation was subtle at first. Someone left a stack of HOA design guideline pamphlets on my porch one morning, neatly rubber-banded. There was a pink Post-it stuck on top, just a friendly reminder. I didn't need a handwriting analyst to know who it came from. I threw it straight into the wood stove and toasted a sandwich over it. A week later, a man in khakis and a logoed polo shirt knocked on my door while I was rebuilding a gate hinge. "Mr. Miller?" "Depends. You selling something?" "Community code enforcement, sir. We've had complaints about a structure on your property that may be in violation of local guidelines." "Local guidelines," I repeated. "Whose guidelines?" He hesitated. "Aspen View Trails HOA. I stared at him for a second. "You realize I'm not in your HOA, right?" "Well, technically, your barn is visible from several member properties and also from the main road that connects to HOA-managed infrastructure. That gives us grounds to file an adjacent visibility claim under Covenant Clause 7.4. "That's adorable," I said. "Now get off my land." He handed me a laminated violation report and retreated fast enough to suggest this wasn't his first rodeo with someone holding a hammer. That night, I emailed the Regional Historic Preservation Office. Attached a scan of the HOA's new notice. They replied within hours, unusually fast for a government office. Their tone was dry and official, but the message was clear. No private entity, HOA or otherwise, had any legal authority over a federally registered landmark. Any further attempts to pressure or interfere would be considered harassment and referred to federal authorities. I printed that email and taped it inside my storm door, right at eye level. I also sent a formal cease and desist letter to the Aspen View Trails HOA, certified mail. It included copies of the federal protection paperwork, the historic site number, and a brief paragraph outlining the consequences of interfering with federal property. For a few weeks, things went quiet. No pamphlets, no khaki inspectors, no threats about aesthetic degradation. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally understood the meaning of not your jurisdiction. But then Roger, a local guy who runs the feed store down in town, mentioned something over a bag of dog food. "Hey, you hear what they're saying up in that HOA complex?" I didn't look up from my wallet. "Let me guess, that I'm breeding coyotes in the barn?" Roger laughed. "Close. Word is the HOA's having a meeting next week. That lady president, what's her name, Karen? She said they're reassessing property boundaries to include visually disruptive zones." "Visually disruptive?" "She said your barn's killing resale values." I didn't say anything, just nodded and walked out with my dog food and a fist clenched so tight I nearly broke the receipt. 2 days later, I came home from a trip to town to find a landscaping crew parked at the edge of my property line, taking photos and measurements. They didn't even look guilty. I walked right up to the guy with the clipboard. "Problem?" Just conducting a visual impact survey for Aspen View Trails HOA, sir. Nothing invasive. Step 1 foot past that fence, I said, and you'll be the subject of a very different kind of survey. They packed up quick. It was getting worse. And Karen wasn't hiding anymore. She started sending emails instead of letters. Official-looking PDFs with HOA logos, digital signatures, references to some revised compliance framework. She demanded that I initiate removal of the non-conforming structure or face mandatory abatement action. I replied once, just once. Dear Ms. Dubois, your emails are being preserved as part of a growing file regarding unlawful attempts to interfere with a federally protected structure. I am not a member of your HOA. My property is not within your jurisdiction. You have no legal authority to demand compliance. Any further attempts to threaten, mislead, or intimidate will be forwarded to state and federal authorities. Sincerely, James Miller. I CC'd my lawyer, the Historic Preservation Office, and, just for flavor, the local county clerk. Her response came back in 6 words. We'll see about that, Mr. Miller. I was only supposed to be gone for 3 days. The Denver Preservation Conference wasn't exactly my idea of a vacation, but it was the kind of thing you don't skip when you're one of the few people in the state who's restored a 19th century barn using original joinery and period correct wood pegs. I'd been invited to present a workshop and meet with a few folks from the Office of Historic Preservation. Good people, nerds like me, but with more patience for paperwork. Before I left, I did what I always did. Locked the gate, double-checked the security cameras, gave the dog sitter instructions for Murphy, and drove out with a cooler full of sandwiches and coffee that could dissolve copper. I wasn't worried. The property was isolated, the barn was solid, and despite Karen's increasing delusions, I didn't think even she was crazy enough to do something while I was gone. Spoiler alert, I was wrong. I got the first call on the second day of the trip. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then checked it while eating lunch with a preservationist from Pueblo. Hi, this is Trent Walker with Peak Ridge Improvements. We're on site at your property and starting the removal process of the structure per the signed authorization. Just wanted to confirm placement of the debris container. Call me back if you have a preference. I felt my chest compress, like my ribs had closed around a scream. I excused myself, barely making it outside before calling the number back. Trent speaking, came the voice, too casual. This is James Miller. What the hell are you doing on my property? There was a pause. We have a signed work order from the Aspen View Trails HOA with your signature attached, authorizing partial demolition and removal. You absolutely do not. Well, it's got your name on it. I didn't sign a goddamn thing. That barn is a federally registered structure. Do not touch another plank. I'm calling the sheriff, the NPS, and a lawyer in the next 30 seconds. That's when his tone changed. Wait, this is a historic site. You're standing next to a bronze federal landmark plaque. You're one roof shingle away from felony charges. He cursed quietly. We've already started on the shutters and some siding. Christ. Let me get the guys to stop everything. I hung up and immediately called the regional NPS office. After 10 minutes on hold, I got through to a senior officer named Riley, who calmly asked for the address, the name of the company, and any contact information. I gave him everything. His voice got tight by the end of the call. We're dispatching a team now. This is a big deal. I left the conference that afternoon and drove straight home. 3 hours later, I pulled into my gravel driveway and felt like I'd been punched. The barn looked like it had been mauled. 2 shutters gone. A chunk of siding peeled back like someone had tried to gut the building. There were muddy tire tracks near the east wall, wood debris scattered like bones. And parked beside the barn was a white SUV with HOA plates and a magnetic sign that read, Community Compliance Monitor. Karen was there. Of course she was. She stood next to one of the contractors, arms folded, sunglasses perched on her head like a goddamn tiara. She was pointing at something on a clipboard when I stepped out of my truck and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. James, she said sweetly, you're back early. You broke into my property. That's a strong word. You falsified a signature and sent in a demolition crew. Karen didn't even flinch. We received authorization for abatement. The barn violates multiple aesthetic standards. You don't have jurisdiction. She turned, speaking calmly, but with that same tight smile. We've reviewed that stance and found it insufficient. Your structure poses a visual threat and devalues adjacent parcels. As such, the board approved emergency corrective action. There is no board with authority over this land. I pulled out my phone and started filming. She recoiled like I'd pulled a knife. Stop that. Federal investigation's already in motion. Might as well make sure we get the visuals. One of the contractors, a bearded guy in his 50s, walked up with a worried look. Sir, I didn't know this was a protected structure. I swear. She told us everything was approved, gave us paperwork with your signature. She forged that. He paled. I've got a crew halfway through siding removal. We're stopping now. Immediately. Good. Start loading your shit. And you'd better hope that plaque wasn't scratched. Just then, a black SUV pulled up. National Park Service plates. 3 officials stepped out, one carrying a folder, the other snapping photos and talking into radios. Karen took a half step back. Karen Dubois, the lead officer asked. She nodded, hesitantly. Do not leave this property. We need a formal statement regarding the unauthorized partial demolition of a protected structure. Mr. Miller, please step aside with me. They separated us like we were criminals at a traffic stop. I handed over my documents, pointed out the damage, the camera footage, the call log, the voicemail from Trent. Karen stood stiffly while another officer photographed her SUV, the clipboard in her hand, and what looked like a set of forged documents she'd printed at home. That night, I sat on my porch with Murphy curled up at my feet and a dull pressure behind my eyes. The barn loomed in the moonlight, battered but still standing. A survivor. But this wasn't over, not even close. I barely slept that night. I kept checking the cameras, walking the perimeter, inspecting the damage with a flashlight like the scene would suddenly shift if I looked at it from the right angle. But the reality never changed. She did it. She actually went through with it. She faked my name, sent in a crew, and started tearing down a piece of American history because she didn't like the way it looked from her goddamn balcony. The barn looked like it had been through a mild hurricane, cosmetic damage mostly. The frame was intact, but the exposed siding and missing shutters made it look naked, vulnerable, violated. I'd rebuilt that place with my hands. Every piece of that structure had passed through my palms. Seeing it ripped open made my stomach churn. By morning, the sheriff's deputy showed up. I'd called the county station after the NPS team wrapped their preliminary documentation the night before. I wanted local charges filed while the feds got their ducks in a row. The deputy was a middle-aged guy named Dan with tired eyes and a notepad the size of a Bible. So, let me get this straight, he said, standing beside me on the gravel. You were in Denver, and while you were gone, someone forged your signature, entered your property without permission, and began demolishing a federally protected historic structure? That's the gist. He looked up at the barn, whistled low. Jesus, looks like they used a backhoe to swat a fly. I've got the voicemail, the call logs, the security footage, the emails from Karen, and the paperwork from NPS stating the federal status. You want me to go get coffee while you write the arrest warrant? He didn't laugh, but he did scribble faster. While Dan did his thing, Karen returned to the scene like she'd forgotten something important, like the part where she wasn't supposed to be there. She pulled up in her SUV, got out with a clipboard, and strutted toward the barn like nothing had happened. What the hell is she doing here? I muttered. Dan noticed her too. That the woman? Oh yeah. Karen walked right up to us and started talking like she was giving a guided tour. I'm here to supervise corrective efforts. There's no need for hostility. Dan raised a hand like a crossing guard. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. I'm the HOA president. I have authorization. You are not law enforcement, he said firmly. You are not a licensed contractor, and from what I've gathered, you're not even authorized to be on this land. Her mouth twitched. This structure violates regional visibility guidelines. Our board. There is no our board here, ma'am, I snapped. This isn't your property. You have zero legal authority. You forged documents. You impersonated a property owner. That's fraud. She actually scoffed. Don't be dramatic, James. No jury's going to convict someone for improving a rotting old shack. Dan tilted his head. Did you just admit to ordering this demolition? I authorized aesthetic corrections. Yes. Based on a forged signature. I don't recognize your interpretation of those events. He looked at me. That's a new one. Another SUV pulled up, this time from the county prosecutor's office. 2 men in suits got out and walked toward us like they'd been waiting for this case to fall in their laps. Ms. Dubois, one of them said, you are being notified that you are under investigation for multiple offenses, including document falsification, trespassing, unlawful destruction of protected property, and impersonating an authorized agent. Karen stood, perfectly still. "You're kidding." "We don't joke about federal crimes," he said. "You can't be serious. This man is obstructing our community vision. He's lowering property values. That structure is an eyesore." The prosecutor looked at her with the calm of a man who has heard every excuse in the book. "Ma'am, the structure in question was built in 1886. It's been federally registered as a historic landmark. Your personal taste does not override national preservation law." Dan stepped between them. "For your own sake, I suggest you stop talking." Karen spun on her heel, stormed back to her car, and drove off without another word. Later that afternoon, the NPS returned with a forensic team to photograph and document the damage in detail. They pulled wood samples from the broken siding, scraped tire tracks, and cataloged the missing shutters. One of them asked if I had photos of the barn pre-damage. I handed them a flash drive with over 200. He nodded like I just handed him the winning lottery ticket. The hardest part wasn't the damage, it was the violation. That barn wasn't just old wood. It was proof that things could be made to last, that we didn't always need to bulldoze the past to make room for cheap, sterile replacements. It had survived over 100 years of weather, war, and time. But it almost didn't survive Karen Dubois, and I had a feeling this wasn't the last stunt she had up her manicured sleeve. You never realize how many people are quietly watching until something like this happens. In the days that followed Karen's little demolition stunt, my inbox flooded. Journalists, historians, angry HOA members, a guy from Texas who wanted to donate antique barn hinges just to piss her off. It was surreal. But I didn't have time to enjoy the absurdity because the real storm had just begun. The county prosecutor moved quickly. I got a call from their office asking me to come in for a formal statement. I brought everything. The letters, emails, camera footage, voicemail, and most importantly, the work order with my signature forged at the bottom. I'd taken one look at it and immediately spotted what was off. The S in James was a hard serif. Mine curls. Always has. It was like someone tried to forge Mozart's sheet music with crayons. They didn't need convincing. They already had a team reviewing every piece of documentation Karen had submitted under the HOA's name over the past year. "We have reason to believe this wasn't an isolated incident," said the assistant DA, a sharp woman named Colette. "Did you know about a stone bridge in the neighboring county?" I blinked. "What?" She opened a folder and slid across a photograph, what looked like a demolished stone bridge, reduced to rubble and caution tape. Early 20th century, unregistered but flagged for historic status. She spearheaded its removal last fall, claimed it was a safety hazard. The board approved it based on falsified engineering reports. You think she's got a pattern? We're almost certain. Turns out Karen had been treating the HOA presidency like a throne and the surrounding land like a kingdom in need of beautification, according to her tastes anyway. She'd strong-armed members into repainting homes, ripped out heritage fruit trees, fined an elderly couple for having a weather vane shaped like a pig. One contractor claimed she made him tear down a gazebo because it had floral vulgarity. But my case was different. It had teeth, because this wasn't just a petty tyrant throwing her weight around. This was a federal crime. That same day, one of the contractors, Trent, the guy who'd called me, dropped by my property. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the day of the demolition. "I want to set the record straight," he said, holding up a flash drive like it was radioactive. "I recorded our meeting. I always do, in case a client screws us on payment." I invited him inside, gave him coffee, and let him talk. The audio was damning. Karen's voice was clear and clipped. "You have full authorization. The owner approved this yesterday. If you delay, I will report you for breach of contract. Then, don't worry about the plaque. It's just there to make it look fancy. And the best part, I forged his name myself. It's not like he reads half the crap people send him anyway." I didn't even blink. I just copied the files and drove them straight to Colette's office. Within 48 hours, the feds joined the party. 2 agents from the FBI showed up, along with a representative from the National Park Service's legal division. They walked the property, interviewed the contractors, took forensic scans of the signature. The moment they confirmed forgery on a document used to authorize destruction of federal property, things moved fast. Karen, meanwhile, was imploding in slow motion. I heard through a neighbor that she tried to claim the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that Trent had gone rogue, that I had verbally agreed to the demolition over dinner, which is a hell of a claim considering I'd never shared more than 10 feet of air with her. Her lies were unraveling like a cheap cardigan. Then came the kicker. A quiet guy from the HOA board named Lenny reached out to me through a mutual friend. We met at a coffee shop off the highway. He looked nervous enough to pass for a fugitive. "I'm stepping down," he said. "This whole thing's gone too far." I sipped my coffee. "What do you know? She never brought votes to the board. She just issued orders, said she had executive discretion. And honestly, most of us were too intimidated to push back." "Did you know she forged my signature?" Lenny nodded miserably. "We all had our suspicions, but she made it seem like you'd agreed off record, and if we questioned it, she'd remind us of the fines she could impose. She's not stable, man." He slid over a thumb drive, meeting recordings, emails, and a file labeled Compliance Options. "I think you'll want to see it." He was right. That folder contained internal HOA discussions where Karen proposed expanding jurisdiction to cover adjacent visual zones, which included my property, even though it legally wasn't and couldn't be part of the HOA. She'd even drafted a fake annexation plan. It was batshit crazy, and it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that everything she'd done was premeditated. By the end of the week, the case had gone from property dispute to a full-blown federal investigation involving forgery, mail fraud, unlawful demolition, and possible extortion. And Karen. She had no idea just how deep in it she really was. I always figured if I ever made the news, it'd be for something boring, restoring a courthouse maybe, or falling off a ladder with a nail gun in my hand. What I didn't expect was to open the morning paper and see my barn on the front page, under the headline, HOA President Orders Demolition of National Landmark. FBI investigating. Below that, a photo of the barn with one wall half torn open like someone had tried to vivisect a museum. And standing in the corner, blurry but unmistakable, was Karen in her sunglasses, arms crossed like a self-satisfied executioner. The article went viral within hours. Local news stations picked it up first, then the state networks. By day's end, it had reached national outlets. There were hashtags, threads, memes. A favorite one showed Karen's face photoshopped onto a wrecking ball with the caption, "HOA'd enough?" And suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Preservationists across the country were livid. Historical societies published open letters. Activists started GoFundMe campaigns for the barn's restoration, even though I hadn't asked for a dime. One senator from Colorado tweeted about it, calling for stricter regulations to limit HOA overreach on private non-member properties. But my favorite reaction came from a retired ranger who'd worked for the National Park Service for 30 years. He showed up at my gate with a binder full of court precedents and said, "Just wanted to shake your hand. You're the guy that finally broke the HOA monster. Hell of a thing." I shook his hand. He left the binder. I kept it. Karen, on the other hand, was disintegrating in public. Someone leaked the HOA meeting recordings, the ones where she ranted about eliminating architectural pollution and neutralizing disruptive structures. Her voice was cold and commanding, like she thought she was ordering a military strike. Then came the emails, full of threats, directives, and backhanded comments about people who think splinters equal culture. One even called my barn a malignant growth on the landscape. The backlash was immediate. HOA members started quitting. 3 board members resigned in one day. Local residents protested outside the HOA clubhouse, holding signs that read things like, "We stand with the barn," and "Preserve, don't destroy." One neighbor offered to paint their entire home to match my barn out of spite. The city council got involved next. A special meeting was called to review the HOA's incorporation authority and jurisdictional boundaries. By a unanimous vote, they passed a temporary injunction. No enforcement action, regulatory activity, or jurisdictional claim by the Aspen View Trails HOA shall apply within a 2-mile radius of James Miller's property until full resolution of federal and state legal matters. Translated, Karen had just lost the ability to touch me, my land, or anyone even near me. Her little empire was shrinking. Then the big one dropped. The Colorado Attorney General's office issued a statement confirming that a grand jury had been convened to review evidence against Karen Dubois for falsification of documents, mail fraud, criminal misrepresentation, destruction of protected federal property, coercion of private contractors. The moment grand jury hit the news, her lawyer dropped her. The HOA issued a public apology, though they conveniently blamed an isolated overreach by a rogue board member. Rogue, like she'd just gotten off a jet ski and forged my name on a whim. But Karen still refused to back down. She gave an interview to a local news station, standing in front of her home in a pastel blazer, saying, "This has been blown out of proportion. I only did what I believed was best for the community." Best for the community. By destroying a barn older than the HOA, the town, and probably most of her fashion choices combined. Then she said the line that cemented her legacy forever. "Frankly, the barn ruined the view from my balcony. It made my mornings unpleasant." That clip played for a week straight. She'd just confessed the motive on camera for the entire country to see: aesthetic narcissism. Meanwhile, I kept working. With help from a few volunteers and a couple of fellow restoration nerds, I braced the barn's damaged wall, replaced the shutters with rough-cut pine, and began sourcing period-accurate materials for a full restoration. Not because I wanted attention, not because I needed to prove anything, because history deserves better than to be torn down by someone with an inflated title and a god complex, and because Karen still had one thing coming she hadn't seen yet: court. The courtroom was cold, not just the air, though the AC was working overtime, but the atmosphere itself. Tight, controlled, like the tension before a thunderstorm. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, suit jacket too stiff for comfort. Next to me, Colette, the assistant DA, radiated quiet confidence like she'd been waiting her whole career for this exact circus. Across the aisle sat Karen. She was in beige, the color of surrender. No sunglasses, no clipboard. Just a stiff jaw and a pair of exhausted-looking attorneys who kept whispering to her like they were trying to teach a golden retriever calculus. The charges were read one by one, each one sharper than the last. Falsifying documents with intent to deceive, destruction of a federally registered historic site, fraudulent impersonation of a private citizen, criminal coercion of a licensed contractor, obstruction of federal preservation enforcement, use of interstate mail in commission of fraud. By the time the clerk finished, Karen looked like someone had drained the last drop of Chardonnay from her soul. We weren't in a local court anymore. This was federal, and they weren't playing games. The prosecution opened with the facts, cold, precise, undeniable. Photos of the barn before and after the damage, video footage of Karen giving orders, emails with timestamps, audio of her bragging about forging my name like it was a party trick. The signature analysis expert went up next, confirming that the demolition order's James Miller had more in common with a sixth grader's handwriting than mine. Then came the contractors. Trent testified with visible guilt. He played the recording for the court. Karen's voice echoed across the room. "Don't worry about the plaque. I forged his name myself." I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The jury did, though, and they weren't impressed. Next up was the NPS agent. He laid out the laws like a math equation. Any unauthorized destruction of a registered federal landmark, regardless of motive or location, is a felony. Period. Then came my turn. I told them everything. From the first letter to the moment I saw the torn shutters lying in the grass. I didn't raise my voice, didn't ask for sympathy. I just laid it out, piece by piece, like a craftsman setting joints into place. The defense tried their best to spin it. Claimed Karen had acted under a mistaken belief of authority. Said she misunderstood the jurisdictional boundaries and thought her role included aesthetic enforcement beyond the HOA's limits. The prosecutor's rebuttal was 3 words. She forged documents. Then they played the clip. Frankly, the barn ruined the view from my balcony. That was it. The entire courtroom went silent. You could feel the temperature drop 5 degrees. The judge slowly turned toward Karen's table. Eyes narrowed like she'd just spat in his coffee. Closing arguments were short. The prosecution focused on intent. The defense begged for leniency. Karen stared straight ahead like she could will herself invisible. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, no one moved. The foreman stood. His voice was calm and final. "On all counts, we find the defendant, Karen Dubois, guilty." Karen didn't flinch. She just sat there, blinking, like the signal hadn't reached her yet. The judge didn't waste time. "Ms. Dubois, this court finds your actions deliberate, fraudulent, and in direct violation of federal preservation statutes. You abused a position of perceived authority to commit a series of crimes that culminated in the partial destruction of a nationally protected structure. He paused. You showed no remorse. You attempted to shift blame. And your motive, by your own admission, was aesthetic preference. He leaned forward slightly, voice like a hammer. You are hereby sentenced to 10 years in federal prison without the possibility of early release and ordered to pay $1.3 million in restitution for restoration costs, legal fees, and punitive damages. Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped beside her. One clicked the cuffs. The courtroom didn't clap, didn't cheer. It just breathed, like something finally exhaled after holding for too long. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Because justice wasn't loud. It was final. A year goes by faster when you're rebuilding something that matters. I spent most of it with calloused hands and sawdust in my lungs, the kind of slow, deliberate work that forces you to be present. Every board I replaced, every peg I shaped by hand, it all felt like a ritual, like I was exorcising her from the wood, wiping away the fingerprints of arrogance with linseed oil and stubbornness. The restitution funds came through in phases. The state grant was matched by the National Preservation Fund. The court-mandated payment from Karen, well, let's just say her mansion sold fast once the auctioneers got involved. HOA leadership had resigned en masse, and the entire Aspen View Trails community was under external audit for mismanagement. Not that it mattered to me. I was back to doing what I loved. The barn was stronger now, not just restored, but renewed. I didn't hide the scars. Didn't patch the replaced beams with paint or pretend nothing happened. I left them visible, darkened but sealed, like healed wounds. The new shutters were locally milled, aged with vinegar and steel wool to match the original grain. The southwest wall, once torn open by Karen's wrecking crew, now bore a reinforced frame and a custom engraving across the threshold. On the first anniversary of the incident, we held a small ceremony. Nothing official, no parade, just some people who cared. Preservationists from around the state came. A few neighbors, the good ones, brought chairs and pie. Even Trent showed up, standing awkwardly by the fence with his hands in his pockets until I handed him a cup of cider and said, "You're fine. You did the right thing." Someone from the NPS unveiled the new plaque. Bronze, burnished, heavy as history. We mounted it right beside the original. Rebuilt after attempted destruction, protected in defiance, preserved in honor. I didn't give a speech, but I stood there long enough to watch the sun hit the plaque, turning the letters gold. Murphy wandered through the crowd, tail wagging, demanding attention and snack crumbs. Someone handed me a photo, side-by-side shots of the barn, one before the damage, one after the restoration. I liked the second one better. Later that evening, I stood out on the porch with a mug in my hand, staring at the barn in the warm light of dusk. I could see every line I'd carved, every bolt I'd reset. It didn't just survive, it came back stronger. And in the distance, up on the ridge where Karen's house used to sit, all that remained was a sold sign half tilted in the grass. The new owners hadn't arrived yet. I hoped they liked old wood. My phone buzzed. Another article link someone sent me. This one was titled, "How One Man's Barn Defeated a Tyrannical HOA President." I didn't click it. I didn't need to read about the victory. I was living in it.